Hello. Today I'd like to talk to you about the country of Iceland as an example of geographic isolation. Before I give my speech, let me provide you with a couple of the terms that are going to come up. I shall talk about the Old Language, which is the basis for modern Icelandic, and that is Old Norse. And I shall also be talking about patronymic and matronymic surnames. You don't need to worry about those too much because all will come clear when I explain that in the speech. And I'm going to start my speech now. Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk about Iceland. Iceland is a small island in the North Atlantic, situated just below the Arctic Circle, between Greenland and Norway. Its nearest neighbour is Scotland, which is 800 kilometres away. So, as you can see, it's a very remote place. As I expect you know, the people of Iceland are Scandinavian in culture, and that is because they are largely descended from Vikings from Norway who settled in Iceland in the 9th century. I should mention in passing that there is actually some evidence that there were settlers on Iceland before the Vikings arrived. It would seem that a group of monks from Ireland got there first. So the people on Iceland are not entirely Scandinavian in origin, they also have some Celtic roots. That said, the island remained a remote place for the many centuries following on from the original settlement, and the people there had very little contact with the outside world. Even nowadays, there are still very low levels of migration to Iceland. One consequence of this isolation, which is of particular interest to us as interpreters, is the language, Icelandic. Icelandic is descended directly from the language which was spoken by the original Viking settlers, Old Norse, and Icelandic has changed relatively little over the centuries. It has more complex grammatical structures than related Scandinavian languages. Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish have all shifted towards grammatical simplification, whilst Icelandic remains a conservative language. In fact, I even understand that it's possible for modern Icelanders to read Viking sagas, which were written over 1,000 years ago, in the original version with no difficulty whatsoever. Icelanders also have an unusual system of names. In most European countries, a family name or surname is passed on by the father, but that's not the case in Iceland. Icelanders have patronymic and matronymic surnames. In other words, people are named after their father or their mother. So men are the son of their father and women are the daughter of their mother. Now, of course, the population in Iceland has grown over the centuries, but it's still small. In 2019, it stood at just under 360,000. Apart from that, Icelanders also keep detailed records of their family history. Indeed, genealogical records go back over 1,000 years. And this makes Iceland a paradise for geneticists. In fact, it was back in the 1990s that scientists first realized the potential of mining Iceland's gene pool. The fact that the population is small and also more or less homogeneous makes it much easier for scientists to isolate certain genes which cause disease in human populations. And it's certainly much easier than is the case for much larger, more ethnically diverse countries like the UK and the US, for instance. Indeed, scientists have already had some success. For example, they have already been able to identify a gene which blocks the development of Alzheimer's disease. And in this respect, the Icelanders have been extremely generous. As much as a third of the population has already provided DNA samples for research. However, as you can imagine, this generous move has not been without some concerns. what happens to the genetic material once it's been collected, not least in terms of privacy. Initially, all this material which had been collected was made freely available in the public domain, and this eventually led to public protests. And I'm glad to say that companies which collect this DNA now have to ask individuals for consent before using the material in the public arena. There have also been concerns about the financial side of the operation. I'm sure you can imagine the potential for private companies to make huge profits from using this genetic material. Most Icelanders are perfectly happy to help out on progressing with medical research, but they're not so happy about the material being provided for free, then being used for commercial gain. So Icelanders have made a very generous gift to the rest of the world, and we should be very grateful to them. After all, they're assisting scientists on the road to treating genetic diseases. Perhaps you might want to pay them a visit. I myself went on holiday to Iceland in 2005 and greatly enjoyed my stay. There is one caveat, however, which again is the result of Iceland's geographical isolation. Iceland has to import most of the food it needs and many other commodities as well, and that means it's an extremely expensive country. So perhaps you might like to save up a bit before you book your holiday to Iceland. Thank you very much for your attention.